Today's Talk About It Tuesday question is, can you talk about the $1 homes they are selling in Baltimore? Is this an opportunity we should be paying attention to? All right, so let's talk about the program, and then let's talk about what an opportunity is, and then let's see if it's an opportunity for you. So, Baltimore City, which is different from Baltimore County. Most people don't know that unless you're from the area. Baltimore City announced that they would be putting up vacant city-owned homes for sale for $1 each. So most people would say automatically that is phenomenal. But wait, let's look at the program further. $1 for individuals and land trusts. If you are a nonprofit organization, then it's $1,000. And if you are a developer, it's $3,000. So you're still like, okay, $1,000, $3,000, what a deal. What we have to examine though is one, why would they be offering properties for $1? A whole big house, 2 stories, 3 stories, for $1. We know they're vacant. We know they're in horrendous condition. So we know in most cases it'll be a total gut rehab, meaning we have to build it from the studs all the way up, right? So we recognize that. But if you do the math, you're like, wait, but for $1, what I have to put in, let's say I put 100, 200,000 in it. Where can I get a house in a major city for $100,000, $200,000? Still sounds like a deal. So you have to ask yourself first, am I capable of pulling that off? Because everybody has $1. If you don't have $1, you can borrow $1 from your friend. So the acquisition cost is the easy part, except that they're only offering 300 properties, and the list now was well over 1,000 people who are waiting on the list to be able to purchase $1 property. But even if you were able to purchase it, do you have the skills to manage that project? Meaning, do you have a lender willing to lend to you the cost of the rehabilitation, or do you have the cash? So do you have a couple $100,000 sitting around that you want to put into it, or do you have the ability to borrow? And I can tell you, because I just happen to have some experience trying to invest in Baltimore, because pre-pandemic, I was going to all the auctions because guess what? Those same properties that they're offering for $1 were for sale for $5,000 back then, and everybody thought it was a super bargain. So I will tell you, there are lenders that are there that are willing to lend to you, no docs, all kinds of stuff, just for the rehab costs, right? So you have the ability to borrow the money if you don't have the money. That's not the issue. So what's the issue? So if they're offering 300 properties, how many properties does the city actually own, and how many vacant properties are there in Baltimore City? So this might surprise you. Although they're offering 300 properties, the city owns over 1,000, probably about 1,200 vacant properties that the city owns. And guess what? They've owned around the same amount for decades, not necessarily the same ones, and that should be scary. Right? Not necessarily the same properties, but it's revolving. They keep owning 1,200, 1,300 vacant properties, no matter what they do. But you're like, okay, 1,200, 1,300 properties, that's still not a big deal why it should be of concern. But guess how many vacant properties there are in the city? Nearly 15,000. So it's about 14,980 something vacant properties in the city. And the city only owns 1,200, and they're only offering 300. So should that be of concern to you? Yes. A large portion of many parts of Baltimore City are suffering from urban blight. They are decimated. I'm not talking about one house on a block. I'm talking about there'll be several houses and entire blocks that are vacant. So when I was making my trips to Baltimore going to the auction, I would go around to the properties that the city owned that were being auctioned, and there would be 5 houses in a row that were vacant, and maybe a house here and then more vacant. So most of the block would be vacant. So then I'm thinking, okay, if I buy one of these in the middle of vacant buildings, can I rent this? Now, if there was a housing shortage in Baltimore, then you would say yes. But guess what? No, I should say this year, for the first time since 1950, they saw a slight increase in the population of Baltimore City. However, it had been declining steadily since 1950, when it reached its peak of over 900,000 people. It went down to 500,000 or something, and now it's about 622,000 people in Baltimore City. So you have this mass exodus of people continuously out of Baltimore. What does that leave? That leaves vacant homes. Homes that had been filled, there's no one to fill them. 52%, I think it's 52% of the population are renters, and 48% are homeowners. So the vast majority of people are, not the vast majority, slight majority are renters, but there's no shortage. Right, so is there a good rental market when people have more inventory than they have people? That's going to drive the prices down. Same thing with home sales. If you got all this excess inventory and you know you can go to the auction at any time and buy one for $5,000, right? Then is $1 really a better bargain? Because if they're so desperate they're going to sell these for $1 that they couldn't sell for $5,000, these are probably the absolute worst locations. The absolute worst locations. Now, can you look at this in the long term? I met an investor when I was there who had purchased an entire block. They have a railroad museum, so anybody from that area will know. There's a railroad museum. 20 plus years ago, he bought the entire block, dirt cheap, and built it out. And it took him 20 years, but now that area is jumping. It's popping. It's expensive. He sold half the buildings on the block and collects rent from the other half, and he's making a ton of money. But that's a 20-year wait for a return on investment. Now, this guy's around my age. I'm in my late 50s now. So he was around my age. That means he purchased these probably when he was in his 30s and waited till he was in his 50s to capitalize. I'm in my late 50s. I can't wait, or I shouldn't say I can't. I don't want to wait until I'm in my 70s to see a return on my money. So we have to think about this. What is the underlying cause of the people leaving Baltimore? Now, we know on the surface it looks like, okay, extremely high taxes for poor services, poor transportation, horrific infrastructure, high crime, lots of drugs, 19.8, I think it is, percent poverty rate. Right, we can look at those, but those are kind of surface level, right? Because those things could be remedied, except the population decline is because there is no industry. So when you look at Baltimore, is one of the top 5 cities, large cities with a declining population. So we have St. Louis, I know we have Detroit, Cleveland, and there's someplace in Alabama, I think, also, but it's in the top 5. And there's a commonality amongst all of them. They were major manufacturing cities. So in Baltimore, Bethlehem Steel was a major source of employment. They had the shipyard, major, right? The harbor, so the shipyard was big. Canneries were huge, where stuff, that was the midpoint between down south and up north, where the vegetables and stuff would go to Baltimore, they would can them and then send them up north. All those industries are dead and gone forever. And people say, well, why don't they just retool? Geography has a major role in what industries go to a particular place, and then human resources. You don't have the skilled labor. So if you bring in some high-tech thing to replace the low-tech thing, then you got to bring high-tech people to replace the low-tech people. And if people don't want that, they call it gentrification, right? So you have major issues. Areas by Johns Hopkins are doing well. University of Maryland doing well. The harbor area is doing well. Downtown Baltimore is booming. There are certain neighborhoods that are booming, but there are huge parts of it that are horrible. So the question is, does the political will exist to turn it around? They've been talking about it since 2010, turning it around, and it hasn't really turned around. Do they have do they have the capability, the political capability to turn that thing around? Maybe with the new infrastructure bill, maybe something will happen. So you got to decide, are you willing to take that chance when the number of vacant houses hasn't changed, the population hasn't shown a reason to turn around significantly, especially in those areas. There's not a huge rental market. There's not a huge market to flip properties. So can you pay $1, pay a couple $100,000 to rehab it and have a beautiful home? Absolutely. You got to look at it two ways. Do you want it as a home or do you want it as an investment? And if you're there and you want it as a home and you can get it in a relatively safe, developed area, or an area, if you look at the city planning, is on the fringe of being developed, then it's a great opportunity. If not, then you might have to pass on this one. So for some people, it would be a phenomenal opportunity. And for people who have the ability to speculate, because speculating is kind of buying it on chance and hoping this thing turns around based on certain indicators that you see, right? It hasn't demonstrated return yet, but there's promise. If you want to do it as a speculative deal and you can afford the waiting costs, right? Because you're still going to pay, again, they have very high taxes there. You're going to pay taxes, insurance. You might not make much on rental income. So if you're willing to pay the $1 and you can get your costs covered, the money that you have to borrow covered by the rental income, then why not, right? But if you're looking for a fast return, not going to happen. If you want to look for a long-term return, it could be an opportunity for you. So I hope these things kind of help you out, things to look at and anywhere, because I think St. Louis was talking about offering for $1. I don't know if they actually did. Detroit had a program like that before. New York City had a program like that, and it really worked out for people in New York. Again, they waited maybe 10, 15, 20 years, but the profit was significant. I know a guy who ended up a multi-millionaire after he bought a bunch of properties for $1. So, well, hopefully those things give you something to think about, and you have to decide whether it's a good opportunity for you. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it, your comments. If you have experience with the dollar program, or if you're thinking about doing it, let me know your thoughts. But please like, share, subscribe, keep the questions coming, and I'll see you next Tuesday.